Welcome to A Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. My name's Mark Evans and I'm Director of the Institute for Governance and Policy Analysis, and I'm sitting in this week for Stephen Parker. Michelle,
good morning.
It looks as if Labour are going to introduce a bill on same-sex marriage. Can we expect a vote on this year?
I think we can expect a vote this year, but not on this bill. It's been a fairly dramatic week for that issue because coming off the back of the Irish referendum, which saw an enormous yes vote, the Labor Party moved. Bill Shorten gave notice of this bill. He'll introduce it on Monday. The government was outraged, saying that this was a political move, that it was counterproductive. But the next thing, Tonny Abbott said, oh, well, we all need ownership of this issue if it's going to go forward. And although, of course, he's a strong opponent of legalising gay marriage, he doesn't want the Liberal Party to be dealt out of the issue. So now there are talks about a cross-party bill, and I think that that will be the next really substantive development on the issue.
This is an issue where Parliament seems to be out of line with public opinion. Recent opinion polls have shown an increase in support for same-sex marriage. It's also an area where other Labour parties or progressive parties internationally have either pushed for reform or introduced reform. Why do you think the issue is so different here in Australia?
It's hard to know really, because a number of countries, of course, have legalised same-sex marriage, and as you say, public opinion is in favour of it, according to the polls. I think that the parliamentarians have been somewhat nervous in terms of some of them have seats where this issue is not so popular, and also you've had strong resistance from the Conservative parties. They have not allowed a free vote of their MPs, and of course this is going to be the big question that the Liberal Party has to face. Tonny Abbott has indicated that if the party room wants a free vote, a conscience vote, then it's up to the party room to say its will. I think the numbers would be there for a conscience vote, but nevertheless there are pockets of strong resistance. But all these questions, including whether the vote would actually get through the Parliament, I think are going to be relatively open until the MPs are forced to concentrate their minds on it. In other words, until there is a bill and a vote that's coming up fairly soon.
Bill Shorten's been sort of accused of political point scoring on this issue. Do you think that will be a good thing for him, or?
I think the Liberals overreacted on this. After all, they can hardly say that this came out of the blue. Tanya Plibersek has had a private member's bill ready to go, not actually being progressed, but ready to go if she could get a Liberal seconder. She's been trying for a year or so to find a Liberal, and no one came forward. So the Liberals are being a bit disingenuous, saying, oh, shock horror. I think from Bill Shorten's point of view, especially if this ended up going through under a Liberal government, which, what an irony if that happened. But from Shorten's point of view, to be seen to be on the front foot is no bad thing among his supporters. Also, the Labor conference is due in July to discuss whether Labor MPs should have a binding vote or should be bound in the vote, as opposed to the present policy, which is for them to have a free vote. Now, Shorten wants to head off any notion of a binding vote, and the fact that he's been talking up the conscience vote, I think, strengthens his hand for that conference.
He's scrambling for an issue, though, isn't he, after what was, quite a soft budget at the end of the day, which has been received pretty well by and large. How much of a test of Shorten's leadership is this next period? It seems to be a fundamental period.
I think it is quite a big test, and while gay marriage is an important issue, it's obviously not going to be the one or among the top ones that build Shorten's leadership, his credibility. He's got to cut through on economic matters, he's got to get out some policy in the next few months, and he's got to show that he really has a plan for the future, as well as being able to attack the government. And of course this July Labor conference is going to be quite an important forum for him. He's got to make that positive and not be seen to be on the back foot. While marriage equality is one of the issues that we expect to be significant, although how significant will depend on developments between now and July, there are other testing issues. One of them is whether Labor is going to endorse turning back boats, whether it will say that in government it would turn back boats. At the moment it's against turning back boats, and this is a very touchy issue for it.
So actually, I mean, coming to that subject of turning back boats, obviously that's a key sort of human rights issue that links into the whole citizenship debate. At the same time, we obviously have the problem in terms of combating terrorism with the upsurge of security fears around ISIS and disaffected Australians going overseas. And the narrative that's now emerged that Tony Abbott's looking into how he can take away citizenship from Australians who engage in terrorist activities overseas. How do you think that's going to play out?
It's been a difficult issue for him this week. Clearly the government wanted to talk up the anti-terrorism narrative this week, and it came out with various initiatives, including stripping dual citizens of their Australian citizenship if they were involved in terrorist activities. Now that wasn't so controversial, but in the cabinet the notion that you could strip people with sole Australian citizenship of that citizenship if they were eligible to be citizens of another country. Not that they were citizens, but they were eligible to apply. A number of ministers were really worried about that, and the government has in fact said now it will discuss that with community groups rather than saying it will be included in the initial legislation on citizenship. I think that Tony Abbott has a problem with that, both the substantive measure and the fact that the cabinet dissent was leaked immediately, which shows that someone out there is, or someone in there actually in the cabinet is willing to get out a very negative story about the Prime Minister. That must alarm him a bit. Obviously
the issue of GST on women's sanitary products has hit the headlines again. After Joe Hockey appeared on Q&A and was asked about it. Do you think they will get agreement from the states to get rid of it, or will the states need another revenue stream to replace what they could lose? Well, the states certainly won't be getting another revenue stream from the federal government. This is probably worth about $100 million over the budget period, over the forward estimates. Quite a lot of money, and the Labor states have said yes, we think this is a very good idea. New South Wales, under a Liberal government, has been much more neutral and, we'll talk about it later, attitude, and the other Liberal states haven't been quick to endorse it. Indeed, WA's quite negative. So I think there's still a bit of argument to go on this. The Treasurers will discuss it in July, but how it'll work out in the end is still rather unclear. Certainly Tony Abbott's not keen on the idea, but Joe Hockey just waded in there, and it was a bit of an embarrassment. To go back to the issue of same-sex marriage, it was interesting that the Irish decided that this wasn't an issue that could be resolved through Parliament, that they required a referendum to deal with that type of issue. Do you think that increasingly contemporary government needs to kick those types of issues to referendum to get greater legitimacy for change? And can we see referendum becoming a more regular part of the political landscape going forward?
I don't think those sort of issues should, in our case, go to a referendum. Ireland's different. The marriage issue is a constitutional one. It's not a constitutional one here. I think it quite reasonably can and should be decided by the Parliament, and a referendum would be not just expensive but quite divisive probably as well. So I don't think that that route would be appropriate or desirable for Australia.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week with another chapter in A Week in Politics.